Okay, folks, now that we've learned about the names of our sexual parts, it's probably important to find out how they all work together to produce orgasm. Well, probably the first people to really investigate this in any meaningful way were Masters and Johnson. Remember that Kinsey interviewed thousands of people, but he didn't watch what they did. He asked them to talk about what they did. Whereas Masters and Johnson actually brought people into their laboratory and asked them to have sex while Masters and Johnson and their team of researchers measured their sexual responses. And they did this so that they could find out what was going on during orgasm. They did this in the 1960s. This was a decade that saw, it was just a decade of change for many reasons. Human sexuality just being one aspect of the kinds of changes that were going on. There were marches to end the war in Vietnam. There were marches for black rights, women's rights, equalities of all kinds. It was the time of the flower child, the free love, and the sexual revolution. So it was a time that was ripe for studying the mechanics of human sexuality. And Masters and Johnson were there to take advantage of this. So what they did is they had hundreds of volunteer participants engage in thousands of sexual behaviors. And they developed a team of researchers who were trained to measure and observe these folks going through these behaviors. So, for instance, volunteers were asked to have heterosexual intercourse, to masturbate alone, to do so naturally, without aids, with aids, with mechanical intervention, without mechanical intervention, in various sexual positions. And Masters and Johnson had little recordings. They recorded different parts of the human sexual response: heart rate, pulse, blood pressure, vasocongestion, how quickly blood flowed to the genitals. And this is how they came up with the mechanics or the physiological aspects of sexual response. And during these observations, they observed that there was kind of the same pattern of physiological response that happened no matter what people were doing to achieve orgasm, whether they were having sex with another person or masturbating by themselves, or even whether they were male or female, that all of us, when we go through orgasm, enter into the same kind of cycle. And for convenience sake, they broke the cycle into 4 phases. Not that you can, next time you're having orgasm, that you're able to say, oh, I'm in this phase, and this. Well, you'll know when the orgasm phase hits, but other than that, it kind of flows together, if you will. And they figured that every time someone orgasmed, they went through some form of this sexual response cycle, and that it was basically the same for men and women. Having said that, how the cycle works showed there are different patterns depending on whether you're male or female. So for instance, this slide here shows you the pattern of female responding during the sexual response cycle. So and how they go through excitement, plateau, sometimes orgasm, and then resolution. And for those of you who heard me say sometimes orgasm, well, sometimes women don't orgasm. I know that a lot of times that women don't orgasm from coitus alone, so from penile vaginal penetration alone, because the clitoris, which is the clitoral glands, which is the nerve center, the pleasure center of a woman's orgasm, isn't directly stimulated normally during coitus. So sometimes what you see is the B pattern. If you see the purple pattern here, where the woman goes through the stages of excitement and plateau, but she never does quite go over the edge to orgasm. And what happens is a slow falling off of physiological responses as she returns to normal without ever having orgasm. Now, it's not always like that. Sometimes for women especially, they have a special gift called multiple orgasms. This is what you see represented in figure A. They go through the excitement phase, the plateau phase, orgasm, and then instead of going right into resolution, they can go right into another orgasm, and then right into another orgasm. I don't know if anyone's ever counted how many that a woman can do, but that might be something for future research. Eventually, so as not to run out of bodily fluids and to die from exhaustion, she also goes into resolution. As you can see, the dotted blue line on number A, letter A. And then finally, the yellow line represents a woman who is quickly aroused, quickly enters into plateau in preparation for orgasms, and then just as quickly her bodily functions return to normal. Now, for men, we have to take into consideration the refractory period. So there's an amount of time before a male can orgasm again after he's orgasmed once. And you see this with the purple line here. So he goes through excitement, plateau, orgasm, and then there has to be a sort of time where there has to be a refractory period in which takes place before he can orgasm again. And that would be the dotted blue line. So there has to be a resolution phase for him each time. So basically, let's take the whole thing and take it phase by phase. So let's start with the excitement phase. Now, what's happening during the excitement phase? This is the initial phase of physiological arousal. And the main thing that's going on is vasocongestion, which is when blood flows to the erectile tissues in your reproductive parts. So for men, that's the spongy tubules and the corpus cavernosa of the penile shaft. For women, it also engorges the sponge-like tissues in the clitoris as well. So even though you can't see, the clitoris gets an erection just like the penis gets an erection, only the erection takes place in the clitoral shaft, which is inside the body. The only outward sign of that is that the clitoris, which has swelled due to this engorgement of blood, tends to retract slightly due to the positioning, to the expanding of the clitoral shaft, and it actually means the clitoris retracts a little bit underneath the clitoral hood. With men, it's much more obvious. You can see when a man is fully erect, and it's hard to miss. For women, it's still happening, even though you can't see it. Another process that takes place is myotonia, which means that voluntary muscles tense in part of this excitement process, which can lead to erect nipples, for instance, in both males and females. Also, for females, the labia swell. For males, the testicles there's a partial elevation of the scrotum, so the testicles are withdrawn closer to the body. Also, for some people, there's a kind of sex flush or a blushing that takes place from the flow of blood to the cheeks or the chest that you can notice during this excitement period. And so the excitement period continues on into the next stage, the plateau period. So all the processes that began in the excitement period continue into the plateau period. I should mention, too, that for the women, the vagina starts to, parts of the vagina start to enlarge. The inner third starts a process called tenting, which is something that will continue into the plateau period. So in the plateau phase, you'll note the clitoris retracts. As I said, it kind of retracts underneath the clitoral hood as the clitoral shaft is continues to engorge with blood. The inner vagina expands fully, and there's in the inner third of the vagina closest to the cervix, it expands in a process called tenting, and what it does is it creates kind of a place where semen can pool outside the cervix, which is the entrance to the uterus. As blood flow continues to sexual organs, you'll notice a color change in the labia. The outer vaginal wall swells. And the clitoris, like I said, is becoming erect. The clitoral glands retracts under the clitoral hood, and the labia minora also darken with, again, the color change in the labia. For men, vasocongestion also continues. Now, if something interrupts you during the excitement stage, it's possible that you could lose your erection. Once you get to the plateau stage, loss of erection is less likely because then your body's kind of fully engaged. So at this point, the scrotum maintains its thick and intense state, and the testicles become completely engorged and elevated against the body. And the Cowper's gland becomes active. And it's at this point that the Cowper's gland secretion, sometimes called precum, is released through the urethra. And we think, although we're not quite sure, that the purpose for this is to clear out the urethra in preparation for the semen emission. Okay, what happens next? Well, let me tell you. So the second phase, the plateau phase, sometimes people think plateau is leveling off, but really this is a phase where, for Masters and Johnson, everything that starts in the excitement phase increases and kind of reaches this heightened state in preparation for orgasm, which of course leads us to the next stage. Now remember that excitement and plateau don't inevitably lead to orgasm. Remember when we were looking at the A, B, and C possibilities for women as they go through this cycle, the B possibility is that she never actually achieves orgasm. And again, this might be because she's not receiving the direct stimulation to the clitoral glands that she needs in order to do that. But let's consider that we do achieve happy ending and that we go on to the third phase, orgasm. So this is characterized, especially in the woman, what's happening is there's vaginal and uterine contractions, which are characterized by muscle spasms that sort of shake the entire body and then lead to this release of hormones, or not release, of endorphins that create a subjective feeling of pleasure and being overwhelmed. Physiologically, what's happening is the pelvic muscles are contracting, and it leads again to this release. For men, there's kind of a two-stage thing. First, there's the emission stage, where there's a buildup of sperm and semen in the urethral bulb just prior to being expelled through the urethra. And this is called the moment of ejaculatory inevitability, which is what it sounds like. It's this inevitable feeling that you're going to ejaculate, which leads to the next part of the stage, which is ejaculation or expulsion, and that's where the muscles, the pelvic muscles contract and force semen out through the urethra during ejaculation. Again, the subjective feeling of release. It happens for both men and women. Anything else I want to tell you here? It's all good. Then what could happen for women is they could go on to have other orgasms. But eventually, even women having multiple orgasms will go on to the final phase, which we'll talk about next. So the final phase, the resolution stage, is basically where everything that was engorged and clenching and aroused and returns to its normal unaroused state. So for women, blood flows back out of erectile tissues. The breasts, nipples, areolas diminish in size. Clitoris resumes its pre-arousal position, and the labia minora return to their normal size and position over the vaginal opening. So everything turns to its original color, its original shape, its original state of unarousal. For men, erection loss begins, and eventually the penis becomes flaccid. Nipples lose their erection, the penile glands lightens in color, scrotal skin relaxes, testicles drop down, and everything returns to its unaroused state. Now I just wanted you, all of us go through resolution. There are no, as far as I know, recorded cases of people who get stuck in orgasm and stay there. Some sexual problems, specific sexual problems aside. For most of us, we get to resolution and we return to normal functioning. But I want you to just imagine for a second what might happen if resolution didn't occur. So I've given you a link here which takes you to a Comedy Inc. sketch where Roman Danilo is pretending to be a tantric monk who has achieved a state of eternal orgasm. Again, not sure this is possible. In fact, pretty sure it isn't, but it's kind of funny to look at. Truly, if resolution didn't occur, we couldn't keep up that heightened state for any length of time without depleting our bodily resources, and probably would eventually die. Not that you have to worry about that, but in case you just want a funny look at it, click on this link below. It'll hopefully entertain you. Finally, I've included this. This is from Pearson Education 2010 Hawk textbook by Roger R. Hawk, Human Sexuality, the 3rd edition. And he includes a table which summarizes the 4 phases. And I think you might find this useful to study when trying to kind of get a handle on how this occurs. So I provided this here for your viewing pleasure. Also, I want you, when you're reading, to pay particular attention to how people responded to Masters and Johnson's 4-stage cycle. Now, I have to say that even critics or people who said, you missed this part, you should have included that part, anybody who's criticized Masters and Johnson still refers to it as their dominant frame of reference. So it's still the best way that we have to describe what goes on physiologically during orgasm. But for instance, someone like Kaplan comes along and she says, well, not all of these stages are necessary for me. Excitement, plateau, you might as well just put them together in one stage. Resolution, I don't see any clients who have problems with resolution. Apparently Roman Danilo didn't come to visit her. She said, well, my patients have problems, their clients have problems, is at the initial stage of desire. Some of them don't even want sex or aren't interested in sex. So she said desire was a crucial part of orgasm. And when you think about it, in order for you to become sexually stimulated, there does have to be a psychological component, an emotional connection. How do we say, je ne sais quoi, chemistry, that moment where you get weak in the knees and you haven't done anything to your knees. So she said that it was very important to include that psychological feeling of desire, that without it you couldn't have the other stages. So I want you to pay particular attention to that. That's all for now. Enjoy the rest of your reading.